11:30, the medicine that Billy had been prescribed the previous weekend was confiscated, and at 12:30, Charlotte arrived in a press conference at Terminal 5, and with live media coverage and news from the BBC and Sky. 5 minutes into that press conference, the Home Office called me up and said, "Bring her in so we can meet her and discuss this issue." That was a month. So we got to the Home Office at 2:30 that Monday, and we were told there's nothing to be done about this. There's absolutely no way we can do this. Cannabis is illegal. There's no medical value. And then 5 days later, Billy Caldwell was rushed to hospital, Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and at 2 a.m. that morning I was negotiating with the Home Office to allow the doctors to sign papers that would enable the medicine that Billy had been prescribed the week before to be ferried from the vaults of the Home Office into the hands of doctors at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And then a domino effect took place, and within days the Home Secretary was announcing an urgent review of medical cannabis, and a few weeks later announced his plans to reschedule cannabis for medical benefits. So often you hear people say things can't change. It's very difficult to make policy changes because of Brexit and because of the Daily Mail and because of the mentality of the Prime Minister, etc. But what was really interesting with this campaign was that on the day that Billy arrived back from Canada, there were probably 12 MPs that I could count on, Norman being one of them, who would stand up publicly and say they supported medical cannabis. 1 week later, when Sajid Javid announced this plan to reschedule, there was almost not a single MP in the House against it. So something really quickly happened, and I think when people ask what was happening there, I think what we saw with this campaign was that this was an example of society moving ahead of politics and policy. Yeah. So the public had come to a sort of settled view about sorry. So I think that was a rather dramatic moment, and of course that has to still play out. There's a lot of policy. Sorry, this mic's dying on me. So I might have to shut now. So there's a lot of policy that needs to be done around this in the coming months to enable to optimise the opportunities for people to get compassionate access to cannabis-derived medicine. And so I'm very involved in kind of making sure that we get the right policies in place to make that happen. But today's debate is really to pick up on not just what's happening around medical cannabis, but also the emerging trend around the globe around reforms to cannabis, and particularly what's happening in Canada, because on the 17th of October, Canada will become the first developed nation in the world to create a fully legal, regulated market for cannabis. And that's being serviced by a large number of very large companies who are basically beginning to have licenses to both cultivate and distribute and sell cannabis in retail establishments all over Canada. So these are very significant changes. This is probably, in relation to cannabis, the moves in Canada are probably the most significant in history. So it's against that sort of backdrop of an emerging reforms around legalisation, the near ubiquitous access that people currently have to cannabis in the black market, and I think a lot hangs on what happens in Canada. So we brought a panel together of people who have a range of different views to sort of explore this further against that context. So I'll let everybody else introduce themselves. Norman.
Just introduction.
Yeah, introduction.
So hello, I'm Norman Lamb. I'm the Lib Dem MP for North Norfolk. I was Health Minister from 2012 to 2015, and I am very strongly in favour of the legalisation and regulation of cannabis in our country. I'm sorry this keeps cutting in and out. It's great that in the innovation tent we have
Hi everyone, I'm George McBride. I run a consultancy called Hanway Associates, which runs events and provides advice to the emerging cannabis industry. We recently hosted a conference called Cannabis Europa in the Barbican with 500 attendees, including 8 MPs, MEPs, and different doctors from around the world, patient advocates. So we're here to help build the cannabis industry.
Thanks, George.
Hi, I'm Greg de Hoedt. I'm the chairman of the UK Cannabis Social Clubs. We are a self-driven cannabis organisation that has formed a set of regulations for cannabis social clubs in the UK. We've got a home growing model where people grow and share at a fair trade cost rather than leaving themselves at the mercy of the black market, which is always inconsistent and always overpriced and often very dodgy. We've been getting quite a lot of media traction lately, opening up the debate and helping people understand recreational cannabis legalisation isn't quite the free-for-all that everyone thinks it might be. I think we're quite a good example of what homegrown cannabis industry could be in the UK, keeping it on the craft and cottage industry level. So,
thank you, Greg.
Hello, my name's Lizzie McCulloch. I'm Director of Policy at Volte, so that's a drug policy think tank. Drug policy think tank. So my background is in mental health, so I worked in mental health frontline service provision and within commissioning, and then moved into working on drugs. So at Volte we basically produce policy reports, we have an ongoing programme of public and private events, and we have an online magazine, and that's what it is.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a former barrister and spent many years practicing in the field of care law, and saw families really ruined by drugs generally. I'm now a counsellor and a trustee of West Kent Mind, where I help them with mental health programmes for teenagers in schools. I'm also mum of 3 teenagers myself, because I've got a vested interest there. And I welcome what's happened with the medicalisation, with the legalisation of medical cannabis. Cannabis has had many medical components, and I think personally that probably is long overdue. I also welcome the decriminalisation of small amounts of possession. I don't think that should be a hospital issue, not an issue for the criminal justice system. But for me, where my current red line is, I'm not in favour of full-scale recreational cannabis at the moment. I've got loads of questions around that, and I'm expecting to get some answers.
Yeah, great. Lovely, thank you. Very good, that's very good. Okay, before we just begin, can I just have a quick show of hands? So, who at the moment would say that they support medical cannabis in the UK? And who is against access to medical cannabis in the UK? So it's a bit like the House of Commons, actually. In this.
Evil people,
okay.
all of them.
Who at the moment, show of hands of people who say at the moment they would currently support the legalisation of cannabis for responsible adult use? Is there no? And who's against the legalisation of cannabis for recreational use? Right, strong libertarian fringe in here.
Who's not made up their mind yet?
Great, you're the people we're going to focus on today. Great stuff. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kick off and by asking Norman, because Norman's been at the forefront of this debate in the UK for many years. At the moment, has your view changed over the recent years, Norman?
My view has evolved over recent years, and it's through witnessing the way in which drug policy operates in this country. I think the war on drugs has been a catastrophic disaster internationally. We manage to hand billions of pounds every year to organised crime. It's a staggering achievement, really, if you think about it. And it engenders enormous violence in predominantly the poorest communities around our world. If you look at the violence in Mexico, it's horrific. So much of it's driven by the drugs trade. If you look at what's happening on our streets in London, actually there's a very close association with gun and knife crime in London and the illegal drugs trade. And yet never is the association made by government. We managed to criminalise so many young people in this country still through the use of cannabis. At the moment I've got a constituent who happens to use cannabis because he has acute pain in his knee following a skiing accident. He is now going to be prosecuted by Norfolk police. Staggeringly stupid. Waste of public money to do this. There is no public benefit in prosecuting this man for using cannabis. But if we had a regulated legal market, we would actually protect teenagers, your 3 teenage children, so much better than we do at the moment. Most of the cannabis that's available on the street, which you buy off your local criminal, is of the strongest potency. We do nothing to protect young people from the dangers of the most potent drugs. If we were to do it through a regulated market, we could control the potency of the drugs that are available. It makes sense.
Okay, so before I bring, because I think Anna's got a different view, before I bring you Anna, I've got to ask an issue to George, because George has studied the Canadian market very closely. He's very familiar with the policy goals of Trudeau's kind of policy in this area. Are you confident that the policies being put in place in Canada will deliver the goals that Norman suggests?
Yes. Is this working? Yes, it is. I am very confident. So the framing and the goals in Canada around legalisation was largely aimed at convincing more conservative elements of the community about the benefits of legalisation. So it focused on reducing the profits to organised crime and restricting access to young people. I think the legalisation of cannabis creates an environment in which you can educate young people much better about the risks in a realistic way, where they believe the people telling them about it. And it also helps control the point of sale and encourage people to use identification only to sell to people who are of an age where they can make a responsible choice. Also, we're already seeing the black market being eroded before even we get to this full recreational, because they've had so much take into the medical system. And as soon as this recreational system comes online, huge swathes of criminal organisations are going to go out of business. And a lot of people say they'll transition into other activities, and some of them may well do, but fighting crime is an iterative process where you have to try and deprive criminal organisations of their revenues. And with a drug that is largely safe and used in a safe way, that can be regulated very effectively, it makes a lot of sense. And Canada's seeing a lot of success in this policy, both in terms of generating revenue, protecting children, and fighting crime.
And reducing violence.
Yeah.
George, I mean, how are people going to buy cannabis in Canada in this new market?
They're going to have two main ways, which is either online, and that online trade is going to be controlled by the provincial governments. So that's going to provide a large amount of revenue for the provincial governments in taxing that online trade. That's also a very safe way of selling it, because you can have 3-point identification where you have to pay with ID online, then at the point where it's delivered. So you can ensure that people are definitely over 18 or 19 or 21, wherever you want to set it. And then there will be retail locations, again, which will lose their license if they are ever caught selling to people under the set age. So Canada is going to really restrict the ability of young people to get access. Obviously, young people are still always going to be able to get access if people give them cannabis, but that is the situation we have with alcohol, and I think it is considerably better than having black market dealers who actually actively go out and seek clients who are under 18 because they're customers who are going to be with them for longer.
Will be regulated.
And potency will be at least labelled. These are improvements, so there will still be high potency products, and some people want those, and that's fine, but you can tax it in a graded system, like we have taxes on spirits higher than we do on beers and wines, and that's just sensible policy, and we do it already with alcohol.
Thank you, George. Lizzie, you've looked in, I can give you a sneak preview, because next week our next big report at Volte is being launched, and Lizzie's been the principal researcher behind that report, and it's the biggest deep dive ever into the consequences of the current public policy relating to cannabis and the current law enforcement relating to cannabis on young people. Can you give us a little sneak preview of what you're going to reveal next week, Lizzie?
So yeah, so as Steve said, we're looking at how cannabis policies are impacting young people, and we primarily wanted to use this by looking at data and looking at, okay, so what is the current experience of young people at the moment? And I think what we'll be diving into is looking into issues particularly around how young people access cannabis. So a big part of the report is looking at So how is social media impacting on young people's ability to access cannabis, and what can we do right now, what can't we do, and most importantly, what do the innovations abroad offer? Do they offer opportunities to restrict young people's access to cannabis? And also, if young people do have easy access to high potency cannabis, what impact is that having on mental health presentations? How are young people interacting with the criminal justice system at the moment? How are adults interacting with the criminal justice system? And there's a lot of surprises coming out in this report. And in addition, we're looking at education and public health information, saying, okay, and what we're doing around that.
Okay. The big question then, Anna, have you been reassured at all from what you've heard from the review?
Well, no, not wholly. I mean, I can't gainsay your in-depth knowledge that you guys have, but the the focus group that I have been conducting before knowing I was going to be sitting on this panel with my teenagers and their friends who go off to these festivals, the Reading Festival being the most recent one, is that actually cannabis is now a really, really small part of the scene, and that the 75, they would agree completely, 75% of people at these festivals are on drugs. Alcohol is a small part of it, but it's all ketamine and ecstasy, and cannabis is a really small part of it. And so I posed the question to them that, well, if cannabis was legal, would that be something which you would be interested in? And they said, well, no, actually, because if you're into that sort of thing, you will go for the pills because they last all evening and they're so cheap, and you wouldn't be bothering with the cannabis. So actually, might be this is, of course, you're going to tell me this is anecdotal.
Yeah.
So that of course it is.
But the solution is never to ban.
So
let me finish.
Can I just give?
Yeah, please.
My second concern with this is that the evidence that I've been reading, and I know you'll say it's disputed, coming out of America, is that both the illegal and the legal markets have ballooned since the legalisation of recreational use. So the argument that you will get rid of the criminal gangs, I don't buy that. I think they will transition onto something else more potent and carry on. Why would they suddenly become council workers or teachers or anything else? And on the safety thing, Norman, I agree completely. If it's going to be legalised, let's make sure it's in safe amounts. But then why would people go for that? They might go for the stronger stuff.
Okay, can I just bring Greg in? Because I think, Greg, I mean, you've heard a lot of people saying, there's this concern about protecting kids. How do your clubs operate in a way that protects kids?
So you have to become a member to be able to access the Cannabis Social Club in the first place. That requires you to show your ID, and if you haven't got an ID and you don't know a person that is already a member of the club, then you're not really going to be able to become a member of it. So it's not a free-for-all open coffee, not even like the coffee shops in the Netherlands, which isn't a bad situation where you have to show your ID to be able to, to sell it. Like I know people that have operated coffee shops, and someone underage has walked in and not even asked for cannabis, but the police have walked in there and said, hey, where's your ID, before the shop owner has been able to ask it, and that person's lost their license. So there is some level of regulation over there, but I still don't think the Netherlands takes it as far as it needs to go. They don't know how the coffee shops are supplied. They turn a blind eye to that kind of thing, so they don't know the potencies. There aren't testing and labelling on that. And you say, what are people going to do if they're not selling cannabis anymore? They're going to sell cannabis legally. Those people are not going to have criminal records. They're going to work in a coffee shop exactly like Costa or something like that. Hopefully not as big as Costa. It'll be more on a craft and cottage scale. Like we have lots of individual brands that are more local. But there will be a level of control over it. Who is having a license for a cannabis social club? Who is having a license to grow it? What are the stipulations on being able to grow it and to sell it, and what are the rules to be able to grow it? We need consumer safety standards to be able to keep people safe. So if you label it and say this product has this much CBD in it, this product has this much THC in it, it's likely to give you this effect, compare it to 8 different products, someone's going to be able to make an informed choice over what they use. And actually, most of the people we see joining our clubs are between the ages of 35 and 70.
Can I just, Greg, for the purpose of all this, I'm second guessing, how many people here have been in a cannabis social club? Has anybody in this room been in this cannabis social club? Right? Okay.
Reprobates.
So tell me, can you describe the experience of going, can you describe the consumer experience at the moment of going into a cannabis social club?
It's very friendly. It's you'll go in there.
How big is it? Is it as big as this tent?
There are some that are bigger than this tent. There are some that are smaller, but half the size. There are some that are situated over 3 or 4 floors. They are any space that a community can get their hands on. Really, we're like a church. It doesn't matter. I'll make a good comparison for you. Like we're not where the building is. We are the community of people, and that's what a church is. There are actually more people that consume cannabis on a daily basis in the UK than go to Sunday church service here now. And that's if anything is British, people think that the church is. More people use cannabis. I would claim that the cannabis is a very British institute right now. People believe in it.
And so the obvious question is, what do the police make of these cannabis social clubs?
Well, we've got 6 police crime commissioners that have actively come out and said, I support the Cannabis Social Club model. There's going to be a pretty big piece on Victoria, Derbyshire on Wednesday. I've been up to speak to the head of the police crime commissioners on substance misuse. And there's a huge spice problem going on at the moment in the UK, and the only reason people are turning to these synthetic cannabinoids is because cannabis was made illegal. Now we're 3 or 4 generations down the line of people tweaking like chemicals in the lab, and you've got people standing up in the middle of high streets or laying down like clusters of them, you know, out of their minds. That's not nice to see people in that situation. And Cannabis Misuse of Drugs Act, I'm not going to call it prohibition because it's the Misuse of Drugs Act that's caused it. You can compare that to people coming into a cannabis social club and people knowing your name and feeling concerned about you if you've got a healthcare problem.
Yes, who wants to go to a cannabis social club now, having heard this? Who hasn't been would like to go? How many customers have you got? Right, well done, Greg, you're doing well. Can I just one thing, no, if I may, but I mean, so Greg has proposed a model which is about craft-based grassroots organisations. It's almost like a big society in action, isn't it? This, you know. But what I would, but if I was, this is a largely conservative gathering, I'd argue. If I was to sort of take the opposite political position on this, if this was a Momentum festival, not a Tory festival, would the question would be asked about this big business, the rise of big business, alcohol, pharma, tobacco coming in. They're making big investments in the industry, and I'd be very concerned about given what's happened, given the history of alcohol abuse, the history of tobacco abuse. What would you say to that?
I'd flip that on its head. I'll just shout. I'm fed up with this thing. I'd flip that on its head because alcohol and tobacco are both demonstrably more harmful products. So when you see the $4 billion investment from Constellation Brands into Canopy Growth, the world's largest cannabis company, that shows a signal from big business that operates in products that kill people, shifting towards lower harm products that actually in a lot of variety of different settings can have medical benefits. They can also have risks. But this shift away from tobacco and alcohol is very promising from a public health perspective. It's also a huge boon for the economy. We've seen out of nowhere the fastest growing industry in North America arise. There are upsides and downsides to that. There's been a lack of social justice in certain areas of that wealth creation, and we've seen a lot of very rich people get a lot richer, but we've also seen a lot of people who before had a passion for a plant that gave them great benefit and great enjoyment be able to go and build a business out of it like I've been able to. And I think it's fantastic when people are able to go and make a living doing something that doesn't harm anybody else, that improves their own life and the life of their friends and families, and make a business out of it.
Are you relaxed with this business coming in, Greg?
Well, obviously there are concerns that you're going to end up with the McDonald's of weed, and that's not kind of what everyone wants. Obviously, there's a need for for large commercial cannabis to be able to produce it at a cost that people want it when they don't quite care about the finer intricacies of how it was grown, and knowing the terpene profile and the lineage and all that kind of thing. But then you've got the connoisseurs who look at cannabis like people who look at wine in a fine way, the sommeliers. Our movement is full of people who pride themselves on being a cannabis expert, and they want to know that small community growing cannabis, that craft cider and craft beer is sort of like the good example of it. They want to know that they've got the option to go and have these little brands in that they know that they're local, and it is a kind of a business race. People who it is a bit of a business race of people who from the grassroots level want to sort of like move their way up and try and be like Nike of cannabis, but we don't want to see whatever the brands are that are being created in America, where they've had a 20-year head start on us over there, just come over here and whitewash what we've got going on, because it's really important that British people get British jobs. And especially in this conversation, it's true, because otherwise we're just going to get import cannabis because they're growing way too much in America already. You're getting we're already receiving tons and tons of cannabis packages from America already. It's legal. People are prepared to pay a little bit more for cannabis that's been imported to the UK from Oregon or Washington or California or Denver, where it's all the stories are from there, all the brands are from there. They're seeing these products and rap stars buying them, they want to buy those too. They will pay £50 for an eighth, £125 for an eighth of cannabis in a tuna tin that's been nitrogen sealed with a nice label around it that says 21% THC, 2% CBD, indica, and so they know it's going to be relaxing, it's going to be quite strong. They're more prepared to pay that because they know that that's from a brand and it's from a regulated house. It costs $35 to buy out there. People are prepared to pay a little bit more for it over here because they know that it's better than some of the street stuff they're getting.
Thank you, Greg.
So I think there was a good article with Prince William in the paper that was picked up by a lot of media outlets yesterday. He was at Heathrow Airport and they've seized, I think half a ton in a couple of weeks. That's a ridiculous amount of cannabis coming in, and so people want regulated cannabis.
Okay, great. Let's have some questions from the floor now, please, if I may. Yeah. So, yep.
I'd like to hear from this lady. She has an opposing view.
Absolutely. I was looking for her. I'm absolutely. I'm going to move from here.
We've got another thing here.
I'm going to take just 3 quick questions.
Would you like a drink, George? Yeah, I'd love one.
You can have some too.
Yeah. Is there enough?
Does this one work? Hello?
No, I've got one.
Let's try this one. Hope that one made any for you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hey.
Hi guys. Yeah, no, just looking at the panel, I was, and the lady next to me. I'll just shout. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Got you.
Yeah. This is like you say, innovation. But yeah, no, I just was looking, and like obviously you've got quite a lot of pro-cannabis people here, and I know yourself on the end there is not. But for me, I really wanted to just speak because for me, from a personal point of view, and knowing people who've been deeply affected, and George, I know you saying that your business doesn't harm, but I'd like to question that because to me, cannabis really, really does harm. It affects people's mental health in a way that a lot of things nowadays don't affect. I've actually had 2 friends.
Alcohol?
Yes, and alcohol as well. And I mean, there is a bigger question here as well, and that's the fact we've got to look at as a society. Why do we feel we need to get out of our heads on alcohol? Why do we feel we need to get out of our heads on any kind of drug? Now, I've had 2 friends, and one committed suicide, and I know that the addiction to cannabis really built up to that, and I know they're not alone. There's many people who get affected by that, and I hear what you're all saying, but from personal experience, and myself as well, when I left school, didn't really know what I was doing, felt lost, I was in reaction to society because I was brought up in a way like we all are, where we feel there's a lot more, but we know there's a lot more, but we don't necessarily get to see it on a daily basis. So I started smoking, and I feel like I lived for a couple of years under a cloud of smoke, as in my life didn't evolve. If the people I also met in this situation, it really affects mental health. It so does, and it wasn't until like I properly stopped smoking, and now I contribute to the society, and I actually stand up and say what I feel in society instead of running away from it, because I can generally say that I feel a lot of drug taking, alcohol is running away. And we're not looking at why are we running away, and that's the real question.
I'm going to say thank you for your contribution. I'm going to take my chair. Two more very quick questions. Keep them short, no speeches, just very quick.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment. I live in Amsterdam, and cannabis is perfectly legal there, and I can tell you that it's one of the most cohesive societies that I've lived in. People are not falling down every day. It's one of the wealthiest and most productive societies. So I think trying to draw these straight lines between one thing and something else is frankly nonsense.
Thank you.
Wouldn't it make a lot more sense to follow the Portuguese model and just decriminalise the use of all drugs all along?
No, definitely not.
Okay. So can I get maybe response? Norman, you're a champion of mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to give up on this. I totally understand your anxiety. I've spent years and years focusing on mental health and the risks to people's mental health. We have a son who got involved in cannabis use, who has had significant mental health issues. But all of the concerns that you express and the damage that's been done to your two friends, including the suicide, has happened under the current illegal market. Your argument would have some sort of strength to it if with illegality you couldn't get access to drugs, but you can. In every community around our country, anybody who wants cannabis can get hold of it, but you have no idea what you're buying, and that's what makes it more dangerous to people's mental ill health than having a regulated market. Now, there are different approaches. In Canada, they are going to label the different strains. In Colorado, they have a maximum strength. We could decide for ourselves to limit access to the most potent varieties if we wanted to. But the most dangerous drug of all, on the evidence, is alcohol. And I bet when you leave your social clubs, you don't go marauding down the street committing acts of extreme violence. But that's what happens when people turn out from nightclubs. You go to sleep.
No, we can't help the homeless people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
but when you leave a club after...
Okay, thank you. You'd like to respond to that?
Yeah.
That's worse.
Okay, so thank you, Norman. And I know you do some amazing work with mental health. But yes, just generally, society standards are really dropping. We see it daily. And for me, society standards would drop further if we're to say that this is okay and this is, that this actually should be made legal.
Prohibition never works.
Can I take a question on the Portugal model? Because I thought a few people know. Lizzie, would you want to comment on whether you think the Portugal model is a better model than the legalisation model?
Yeah, so I think there definitely are benefits to decriminalisation. I'm not saying they're not. So in terms of destigmatising people, it's obviously not good for someone's life chances to give them a criminal record. There's a lot of evidence behind decriminalisation that improves health outcomes, but it does not go far enough. It does not address the illicit market.
Yeah.
That perseveres. There's no way of controlling potency. So you talked about mental health, and from what we've seen from our research, the system we have at place at the moment isn't working for mental health. So potency is now, high potent varieties of cannabis now dominate 94% of the market share. It's all really strong cannabis that's out there at the moment. What's quite interesting is we at Volte we hosted a policy roundtable where we invited representatives from all different third sectors, so criminal justice, mental health, policing, and we said, okay, right, so we've got a problem around potency. What innovations are coming out for us? How can we respond to this? What can we do about this? What plans are in place to deal with this problem of potency? And there was silence around the room because no one knows what to do about it. Whereas regulation, it does offer an option, and decriminalisation doesn't give us that option.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to look at it as the high potency so much as a problem. It's like, stop looking at that bit. It's just focus back on the actual, thing that's creating the market. In Washington, when we became recreationally legal, there was quite a demand for lower potency but high quality cannabis. Because a lot of people, the argument is often it's all high potency THC. We want the traditional forms of cannabis. It's like, if you look at them in a lab, they are covered in mold spores. There's other sorts of contamination. You can see skin cells and fungus. It's not actually a product that we need on there. So while we do need to have lower potency THC strains, we need to have a conversation about what cannabis actually is, because people think that high THC is some mutant monster that's different from hemp, when there's not actually a great difference in it.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Sky.
Thank you. I think personally, legalising, regulating cannabis is a no-brainer, but why not legalise all drugs and get them everyone out of it?
We'll get there.
Hi there, just just another question in relation to health. We've spoken about strength being an issue. We've spoken about people's mental health and the effects on that. What about the business of how you actually take cannabis? And is that something we could expect to change in a more legalised, regulated market?
Hi, no, it's okay. I've just come back from Canada because I have a son who's at university there, and that generation are really worried about what's just happened, because they said the mafia is very, very strong in Montreal, and suddenly cannabis is legal, and maybe last year it was fun, let's go get stoned. What's fun about it? Your parents are doing it, it's not fun. So actually what you were saying is absolutely right. They are being pushed at nightclubs now. They're not being sold cannabis, they're being sold lots of pills. And the university forums are really, really worried about it.
Legalise all drugs.
And they know that the mafia are pushing it, and they're very strong in Montreal, and that Trudeau's made it legal because he makes money from it, and cannabis is boring.
Can I address a couple of those? So I've just I've just been working with a client in French Canada in Quebec that just signed a 200-ton purchase order with the provincial government to supply quality tested, assured cannabis to the recreational market. That will undercut the mafia's profits a huge amount. Also, there's no evidence that rises in other drug uses are correlated with the legalization of cannabis, and we have good data on that now from the States and the US where cannabis has been legalized. As to the other question on the use of cannabis, what's quite interesting in US states is that the use of dry flower cannabis stays pretty much level when you legalize, but what we see a huge uptake in is the use of edibles, tinctures, creams that you rub on your skin. And like Greg was saying, most people who are using those are people predominantly between the ages of 45 and 70 who are using them to alleviate minor aches and pains or to relax in the evening, much in the same way they would have otherwise been using something like red wine, Valium, Xanax. So we see a huge substitution effect from more dangerous drugs to a drug that has no known like lethal limit and quite a low risk profile as opposed to other drugs.
Okay. I was going to ask Norma, if you want to reply to the question about legalising all drugs. Why don't we legalise all drugs?
Well, I've got a completely open mind about how we respond to other drugs. I think take it step at a time, and it's really important that you take public opinion with you, that you go out and make the argument. So I think let's deal with cannabis first. But I think the argument that prohibition ultimately carries with it massive downsides, including particularly violence, is one that applies to other drugs as well. One would want a market where there were very strict controls on access and on supply, and who is able to supply, who's licensed to do things. But the idea that we just carry on as we are, the availability of pills, this is an illegal market still in Canada. It's happening. So we can't just ignore it. We have to try and do something to better protect young people. My interest is in harm reduction, not in criminalising people.
The thing is, we separated cannabis from the rest of the drug market in Canada, haven't we?
I get where you're coming from, but when I'm just with a group of young individuals who are saying, right, cannabis is legal, so we need to do something different, more fun. Let's get the pills.
Yeah, but that's no reason to not legalise weed, is it?
It is.
What, no, seriously, though. You think that's a reason to not legalise cannabis?
Hold on. Right.
Keep cannabis illegal so kids won't take other
I'm really
drugs.
struggling with this whole thing that if we regulate it, it's all going to be fine, because the alcohol market has been regulated now. Is this working?
Just shout.
Okay, the alcohol market has been regulated now since prohibition was lifted in the 30s, and we still have this massive problem. Now you say, okay, alcohol is a more dangerous drug than cannabis.
Massively.
But why? Why on earth, when we've spent the last 30 or 40 years as a society trying to combat the effects of alcohol and smoking, a dirty habit, a dangerous habit, Why then do we now want to turn around and say, stop smoking tobacco, but start smoking weed? Because that's the effect of legalisation. It encourages people. Can I say two more? Can I say that? And then I'll shut up. I know, because I know I'm raining on everyone's parade here. But there's loads of investment conferences taking place now in London with big businesses, and one of the recent ones started with a slide. This is the slide. This is the slide. First slide.
Is that your slide?
Investment slide. Europe's prohibition partners. Europe's legal cannabis market is a £56 billion opportunity, and they carried on by saying this is a once in a generation opportunity to profit from the lifting of a prohibition. They've got their eyes on the prize, which is big money, and I just want to hear more about the safeguards for kids in order.
I can see the safeguards for kids.
That's where I'm coming from.
Totally agree.
Thank you.
Totally agree.
Steve.
You say that you want to know more, but would it interest you to know about the medicinal side effects of cannabis use, including that it's not carcinogenic and increase your lung capacity?
What?
It can increase your lung capacity by 20%.
Okay.
Lots of asthmatics use it.
Capacity by 20%, which is extraordinary people with asthma.
Lots of asthmatics do use it.
Medicinal cannabis, I totally agree with.
Yeah, but it doesn't work any differently for healthy people. Steve.
I don't believe
the thing is though, before we had, but it saved my life.
Hello.
I'm speaking after this.
So we talked about this tax revenue that could be done from.
So what about if the revenue was hypothecated into other harm reduction strategies, things like pill testing? Because that's what at the moment, children are dying. It could be your
Absolutely, and it should happen at every festival. You're absolutely right.
Just to be boring though, tax hypothecation isn't very efficient. It doesn't work very well. The Treasury don't like it. Like, just from an economist's point of view.
That's not a good reason. The Treasury.
Because it doesn't work. You can't hypothecate tax.
Isn't the point the fact that people who want to take drugs, like they want to take alcohol and smoke, are going to do it anyway?
Will do so anyway, absolutely.
Everyone I know from my age has taken drugs, so they, and I don't really know much about weed, but in terms of MDMA, they don't know what they're taking in a nightclub, and it is really unsafe.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down
and that is the comparison that we need to draw to from old age prohibition in America. Like we don't respect the amount.
That's not going to be dealt with by the legalisation of cannabis.
It is.
Hundreds of people
George, hang on one sec. That's exactly what I'm going to say. People used to put bleach in alcohol and sell it as gin, didn't they? We don't have kids going blind off drinking alcohol anymore.
Can I just make a brief point? I actually am one of the guys who's raising money for all these big businesses in London.
What I would say to you is I'm in a choir, and we're quite right on.
And we sing a lot of songs about the man, and I often try to stand up and point out that I am the man and I'm doing my best.
Apropos the 56 billion. Okay, apropos the 56 billion. Investors are totally amoral. It's the only way we're going to get them interested is giving them big numbers. It doesn't mean they don't care. It just means that at that point we're not going to make any headway on them. But
when I talked to some of them this week in preparation for coming here, I said, well, what are you going to do about the public health implications? Where are you going to be when it comes to the programmes we need in schools to educate kids better to deal with this? They said, oh no, that's not our problem.
But we can do all of that. We can do that.
They want the profits, but they don't want any of the responsibility.
The government can tax them and then do what the government want with it. That's society. That is totally society. You can't say legalise cannabis as a corporation and then get the corporation to do all of it.
I've got something interesting to say.
Generally speaking, big business,
He's not
some
using
of the
it,
people
though.
involved on the stage to do with this don't give a shit about the social effects of these kinds of things. They're only interested in the money.
Yeah. And what are the social effects?
That's the debate.
Health for all.
Well, we're here at a debate.
Pain free.
Second thing, I'm quite happy to use cannabis because I'm a responsible adult. I'm worried about the 12-year-olds.
Yeah,
exactly. Can I say something, please, Steve? Can I say one thing important? So I completely agree. Big business is totally amoral. They care only about the fundamentals of their business, but with gambling, there were gambling initiatives, lotteries, gambling. If you do it irresponsibly, it can go backwards. Some jurisdictions in America ban gambling. You then get things like the lottery fund being set up to try and give a social veneer of respectability to an industry that does actually go on to cause some good. We've had the Global Cannabis Partnership set up in Canada, which is pulling huge sums out of the largest cannabis licensed producers to put into social causes, because they know that if they don't get that respectability in the community, that they might go and get banned. Canada's legalised, it doesn't mean it can't unlegalise.
And the 12-year-old is at risk from the criminal on the street corner who's selling them stuff that they have no idea what they're buying.
But they won't go away, Norman.
They will. They're not there.
No one sells moonshine now.
No one's selling cannabis in the streets in the Netherlands.
Okay, so I can hear what everyone's saying, and obviously there's lots of arguments for and against, and we could spend hours doing this. I mean, at the end of the day, when I feel what is true, I know that cannabis and alcohol are not good for our mental health and as a society. Full stop.
Cannabis is such a broad term to sort of like to throw under the bus, though, because there are so many different types of cannabis, and not every type of cannabis suits every type of person. But the black market does not give a shit about that. It just wants to make its profit, and that's the problem. You are, by leaving it illegal and saying, oh well, we can let young people use cannabis because we know that's safer than using MDMA, but we're still letting them have black market cannabis that's being grown by a 13-year-old Vietnamese boy that's been locked in a house for 4 years, and then there's a gang that is making £30,000 a month off of that house by locking him up. You can't consciously say that that's the right way to go about it. I've got something else to say. This cannabis is contaminated as well. We're talking about bootleg moonshine making people go blind. We've got iron filing that is being put on cannabis plants while it's being grown to add the weight to it. When someone smokes that in a joint that's unfiltered, those iron filings they burn. That goes to the back of your throat and your lungs. That's causing real damage that cannabis doesn't cause. Regulation gets rid of that. You screen that out. It's not part of the process. People who like cannabis and want to be part of the cannabis industry do not want that kind of practice to go down, but illegality creates it.
I have one more question from the right. One more question.
Thank you very much. Oh, it's working or not.
Show the box.
Okay, I'll try quick. I fully agree with your point about being under a cloud. I've got a number of friends who I've seen waste a huge amount of potential by living with weed for a very long period of time, but I'm also in support of the legalisation because I think we're fighting a tide if nothing else. But my question around that is that when it comes to young people, in particular 12-year-olds, when legalisation comes in, who is going to be responsible for designing and delivering a message around responsible consumption and understanding?
We've been doing that.
The thing that I think exists is that, to quote Randy Marsh, weed makes you okay with being bored, and that can kill productivity and cut out that ability to progress. But equally, friends that wake up and think it's normal to wake up and have a joint, you don't wake up and think it's normal to have a whiskey. But who's going to be setting that kind of expectation?
Can I get Lizzie then? That's just
yeah, so to answer that, we definitely don't do enough around drugs education in the UK at the moment. So if a young person is lucky, they may get 1 hour a year, but stats for mentors show that's very unlikely. So we're definitely not doing much around this. Whereas what's happening in Canada is there's been absolutely massive investment in public health information for parents and for education for young people, which is starkly absent from the UK to ensure.
The great thing is that with Canada going this way, we are going, as long as we take time and we do this in a sensible pace, we will be able to see the data. But I would like to ask all these guys one more thing, because there has been an explosion from what I've read in fatalities on the roads in the American states. That's what the agencies say.
That's fake news.
Well, it does.
It is fake news.
This is what
the data
government agencies say, 66% uptake. And it makes sense. If people have got cannabis in their system and they're driving cars, it makes sense that they're going to have. We have 250 people die on our roads at the moment due to having drink in their system. I just want to know that you're absolutely confident we are not going to be just adding a whole load more road deaths if we go down this route.
Thank you very much.
Stone drivers drive slower.
We're going to close the session. Right, before I formally thank our panel, I'd like to know, has anyone had their minds changed during the course of last month?
No, suicide.
Anyone coming here today who's referred to who's against legalisation and is actually, okay, I'd like to hear from you.
She's gonna. I put my hand up at the beginning because I, like some of the people in the audience, have had personal experience. My godson's had 2 psychotic episodes. He's broken his own arm, having psychotic rages. He's been in hospital, in and out. It's taken him 5 years to get a degree. When you're up close and personal to seeing that sort of deterioration in a young person, you must think that there must be something wrong to have allowed him to get like that. However, I do think that he would have got like that whether or not the drug was available freely. He might actually have been taking less powerful substances. So I have been convinced today, and I'm pleased I have, because I am a Liberal Democrat, so I
Okay, I just want to say thank you to our panel, thank you for a really lively conversation, and
Thank you, Steve.
Have a quick
pleasure, Norman. Thank you.